Well, listening to that with me was Julia Seeger, our science and technology editor. And Julia, some people are describing this as an historic agreement. Explain to us why.
Well, as we just heard, what's historic about this is that for the first time in all COPs, the document is proposing to mention all fossil fuels as largely responsible for climate change. So it includes oil, gas, and coal. Now, in the Paris agreements, it didn't even talk about fossil fuels. COP26 in Glasgow acknowledged a reduction of coal, but oil and gas were actually never singled out, if you will. And we're not talking about reducing, we're talking about transitioning out. Let's take a closer look, Nadia, if you will, on this excerpts that everyone is talking about today. But it says, it calls on countries to transition away from fossil fuels. So if you look at the first part, transitioning out of fossil fuels, all fossil fuels, so here you're pleasing countries that want a rapid transition like Europe or insular countries. We're not exiting completely, we're phasing out. So here it's just to make sure that we don't upset OPEC countries. If you look at the second part, in a just, orderly, and equitable manner, here you're speaking directly to developing countries. And the last part, in this decade, is for countries pushing for a more binding agreement, highlighting climate urgency. So every word, as you said, mattered. The language was very much important. But what you're seeing is that we're also finding formulations that are still giving leeway to countries to handle the issue as they please, and to make sure that no red lines were actually crossed. So it is indeed a huge difference, but at the same time, now countries are going to have to build their own roadmaps to reach those goals, and that's going to be particularly difficult when you know that, for instance, oil, gas, and coal currently represent about 80% of all global energy. The goal, the ultimate goal, as you know, being to be net zero by 2050. So it's a very ambitious goal indeed.
And a number of NGOs, climate activists, are concerned about some of the language here, including the fact that gas is described as a transition energy.
Well, when we speak about transition energy, it's just the fact that we're saying that we're maybe going to have to need short-term, mid-term, and long-term solutions, that we're going to maybe have to tolerate energies that are not zero carbon in the first place. But in the text, when they talk about transition energy, they're talking about gas indeed. The reason why is because you're going to have to keep gas in certain countries to maintain energy security. There are still in the world nearly 800 million people who still don't have access to electricity. The text also calls on the tripling of renewable energies, of course, but also on the accelerating of zero carbon technology and low carbon technology. And when they say low carbon technology, they're talking about nuclear power. And this is a huge victory for France because they decided to relaunch their sector, the nuclear sector, just a few years ago, especially in the midst of the current geopolitical situation. And France is not the only country to make this choice. This is why you see it in the text today. The reason you would want to use, for instance, nuclear energy is because it is indeed low carbon electricity. There are no intermittencies, and you're going to have to want to meet increased demands in electricity because of the electrification of everything in society. And last but not least, of course, you're less dependent on oil and gas producing countries. And in the wake of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, that's a huge and important point.
And Julia, finally, the text also leaves open the door to the possibility of emission elimination technologies. These are things like carbon capture and storage.
That's right. But here we have to highlight that the text says that it recommends it to manage sectors that are difficult to decarbonize. So NGOs are regretting this mention. They say that carbon capture and storage is really a dangerous distraction. But here there's once again a debate, because if you don't put it in the text, that technology will never become mature because investments are not going to flow in that field. So in the long run, it will never become a technology that is worthwhile. And we saw that actually with nuclear power. It was shunned upon because it wasn't completely zero carbon, it was just low carbon, and hence few investments in the last few years have gone into that field. And now it's going to change. We're seeing more investments in the last few months on modular nuclear reactors, for instance. So it's important to understand that here they're trying to mitigate short-term, mid-term, and long-term solutions.
All right, Julia Seeger, thank you very much indeed for coming in to unpack that text for us.